The chapter we're starting with this morning is the chapter We Agnostics. You've been learning a little bit about alcoholism, and this is their last-ditch effort to try to overcome any barriers that you may have in accepting a power greater than yourself for sobriety. And chapter 4 starts by saying, in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Now, some of the material you covered from there was the 3 types of drinkers, some people who can quit on their own, some hard drinkers. But they wanted to make the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic, and that's what you're gaining from these first 4 chapters. Orientation to steps 1 and 2 for you to make the decision or come to the conclusion. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably an alcoholic. Know who me with 44 questions and all this other stuff. It's very simple. Ask you 2 questions. If when you start drinking you have little control over the amount you drink, or if when you decide to quit drinking you find you cannot quit drinking entirely, you're probably alcoholic. Very simple. Don't complicate it. And that's all you have to do with yourself. Ask yourself those 2 questions. Have I ever tried to quit using? Have I ever tried, or when I use, do I use too much? And you've got your answer. You're probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Now, who knows what an agnostic is? An agnostic is a person who says you can't prove to him that there is a God. All right? I told a good father this morning, I said, you know what you get if you cross a Jehovah's Witness with an agnostic? A man knocking on your door who can't tell you why. To one who feels he's an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But cheer up, something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Why? When we have this obsession that occurs in our mind, an obsession is a thought or idea that has no opposing point of view. The power isn't there. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. That's the first step. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously, but where and how were we to find this power? There's your question. See the question mark? I told you yesterday that whenever you want to know what you're reading in this book, look at the questions that are asked. Put the question down on a page, and then you'll see that the material is answering the question. Where and how were we to find this power? It's asking a question, now it's going to answer it. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Here difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems, and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, for we have reopened the subject which our man thought we had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. The biggest problem I have found out over the years, and have been around a good number of years, is people want to explain it. And I don't know if it's necessary to explain it, because our program tells us that all that's necessary is a willingness to believe. How many people in here are electricians? All right, I'm excluding you. How many of you are not electricians? How many of you don't understand electricity? Quite a few. Now, if somebody went to that light switch and pushed the switch up, what would happen? Lights would go on. If you pull a switch down, what would happen? Lights would go out, right? You don't sit in the dark and say, I don't understand electricity, I'm not going to use the switch. You know if you use the switch, you'll get the result. That's all that's asked, and that's all they're going to try to bring forward in this chapter. Don't try to understand, just use. When you find yourself in a room someplace and you're alone and you're down on your knees speaking to somebody who isn't there, you're on the road. It's that simple to begin the process. It's a willingness to start. Resistance is what hurts most of us. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance at many individuals who claimed to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? Question. And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Question. Yet in other moments we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who made all this? Question. There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. Again, a willingness. The foundation of recovery is based upon willingness. That's why when a person comes to your house on a 12-step call, or eventually you go on a 12-step call, the first question you ask, what is it? What are you willing to do to stay sober? And person who's sick, coming off a binge, jittery, shaky, says anything. And 3 days later, he starts questioning. That's where we're at. We're willing to do anything, so we're willing to begin. Much to our relief, we discovered that we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect the contact with him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. And we're going to be covering that in the next chapter a little more thoroughly. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your conception of God. This applies too to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere, so we used our own conception, however limited it was. There's where I was when I came into AA. I thought I had evaded the God issue thoroughly. I had nothing to do with it. I ran around with a group of AAs who rejected it. I blamed all my problems on the church and religion. And for me to be standing here speaking to you, saying what I am saying today is miraculous indeed. When you go to an AA meeting and you're listening to a speaker, just listen. Listen to the progress in their own lives, and you'll see it's all based on willingness. Okay? Listen to the changes in their lives. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Here's the one short question we have to ask ourselves. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderful, effective, spiritual structure can be built. Now, how many people in here have difficulty with the higher power? No one? This is an unusual group. One, all right? All right? Most groups, when they're newer people, you'll usually find over half of them raise their hands. You'll hear some people saying, I have trouble with this spiritual part of the program. The whole program is spiritual. There's no part. The whole program is a spiritual program. Now you understand we're talking about program, not fellowship. The fellowship has nothing to do with spirituality. You can go to an AA meeting and not even want to be there. You might be forced to be there, and you're welcome. You can come to an AA meeting drinking and they won't even throw you out. All you have to say is, I have a desire not to drink. People confuse the fellowship with the program. This is the program, the meetings are the fellowship. All right? If you have drugs or alcohol in your life, you already have a higher power. See? What got you here? You didn't get down on your knees and say, I want to go spend 4 days with Findley. A power greater than yourself is working, alcohol and drugs, because your life is being affected. What you have is a negative power that's wiping you out. All this program is asking of you is transfer it to a positive power that'll make your life better. That's all it's asking. Get rid of the one that's killing you and get one that's going to make you live, help you live. This is great news to us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes. But I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. Beside a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy. That's where most of us are. Sensitiveness and unreasoning prejudice. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let us look at some of them. Now here come some of the reasons why they believe we should believe in a higher power, and this is going to be exemplified in the fellowship. This is what I'm telling you to do. Look at the fellowship. Look at the people right here in this room. What else besides something greater than themselves could have gotten this group together? Look where we all come from. Never would you have had the opportunity to meet me had it not been for your addiction. How wonderful. Have something to thank God for right now. The reader may still ask, we read that, The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. Here's an illustration. The prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful guiding creative intelligence, right there our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our correct contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating the degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. Instead, we looked at the human defects of those people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. I did those things. You know, I'm the fellow who went to church and said, religion doesn't work for me. I didn't do anything. The best part of a religious service for me when I knew it was over. That's when I felt good. Collection basket went by, all the other events for spiritual growth, I participated in none of them. And I soon got away from it because it wasn't doing anything for me. I wasn't doing anything for it. That's exactly what a lot of people do when they come to AA. The same thing, they sit down, they never participate in a home group, they never carry the message, they never help anyone, and they say AA doesn't work for me. What did we hear last night? The whole program is based on what? Service to others. The man who loses himself finds himself. In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. And if you looked at the stories in some of these in a book, you'll find out that the stories are not how they got sober. I came to AA, that's what you hear in Leeds. The stories were how they came into AA and found God. That's where the culmination of our effort is, in finding God in our lives. Listen to the people who stand up and speak and say, I was in AA 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. I was never into the program before. I was into the fellowship. Now I'm into the program. Why do you think they're telling you that? If fellowship worked, we would have a very high recovery rate, because every year the meetings I go to, the rooms are full. But every year there's only a speckling of people who stay there, and they rotate. Every year it rotates. That's telling you something. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself. Now this is important reading, this next paragraph. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As a celebrated statesman puts it, let's look at the record. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, and to do certain simple things, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. What were those few simple requirements? The steps. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them. When many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. Now, you know, when I recovered as an alcoholic or an addict, we have to be different. We're always going to revolutionize everything. You ever notice that? Put a new man in a meeting and see how many changes he wants to make in a meeting. Been going for 25 years a certain way. He comes in, it's not going right. He's going to make changes, all right? My family was Catholic. So religion can't be too good because it didn't work for me, and being a Catholic, especially the Catholic religion. So I joined various other religions. I was going to find something better than they had. And I keep telling them, well, you know, that's all right for you, but I need something a little better. And I got into some of the occults. Oh, I'm telling you, don't ever get into those. I got one, the initiation, they put 2 candles in front of a mirror, put the lights out, and block the window up so no light comes in. It has to be pitch dark. And I lit them 2 candles, and they gave me some chants to go through. And I had to look in the mirror while I was chanting into my eyeballs. And after about 4 or 5 minutes, there were things that started occurring in that mirror. I shut those candles off, put the light switch on, and I started going to church with the family. You know, some of us are hard-nosed. We're always looking for something different. Be careful. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all the millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today. Yet in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies. We asked ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved men could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved the privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of the air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. But in most fields, our generations have witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. Show any longshoreman a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of a rocket, and he will say, I'll bet they do it, maybe not so long either, and we have. Is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new, by the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something new which does? We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution to these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight or not? Of course it was. What did I just cover in that paragraph? The opposite of the promises. Look to page 83. If those things are dilemmas, and it says, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We'll intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. We are suddenly realizing that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Whenever you have a condition that exists, you're going to find out later in the program this thing will remedy it by going through the steps. That's why it's important to read our material and understand what we're reading. When we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the Spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. The Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems. When others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who had insisted the Wrights could never fly. Logic is great stuff. We like it. We still like it. It is not by chance we are given the power of reason to examine the evidence of our senses and to draw conclusions. That is one of man's magnificent attributes. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach and interpretation. Hence, we are at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it more sane and logical to believe than not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said we don't know. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else He is nothing. God either is or He isn't. What was our choice to be? And that's where we're talking about the self-imposed crisis. And when they used to tell younger people when they came into AA, you haven't drank enough. You haven't been sick enough. Why did they say this to this individual? Because they know there had to be a crisis. See, when you go into this chapter a little later to wives, it's going to describe 4 alcoholics and their progression. And it's going to tell you that the worse he gets, the better it is before he comes into AA. Because when a person is sick enough and they want to get well, everything's going to make sense. When that mind still says, I can handle it, there's difficulty getting the program to work. We take the negative power and transfer it to a positive. Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines and the promise of new land had brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason the last mile, and we did not like to lose our support. What did the man say last night when he was speaking? 12 years in his program with all those difficulties? Why were the difficulties there? He was playing God. See? You'll find out that the people who have the most problems in this program are the ones who want to play God and run their lives and other people's lives. You know, in a rehab unit that I run in Lorain, we have a sign above our telephone. It says 20 cents for the slip machine. You know what we have found out? The people who hang on to the telephone all the time are not into treatment. They're outside of the facility. They're trying to run the show outside of the program. See, they're not zeroing in on their own problems. Do you know, I don't know if any of you, maybe you do, I see there's some court slips here. You know what those court slips are? They're a gift certificate from the court. They're not a punishment. They're a gift certificate for you to come and get treatment and help yourself. And if this thing works, this thing called AA works in your life, you will one day go back and thank the judge for his action. I've seen it thousands of times. We had a fellow in treatment who came to me one time, didn't like one of our staff. Big biker. He had bigger arms than I have. You know? He come in, he was going to kill a guy. That was on a Thursday. And he used some pretty profound language when he was telling me that. And I told the staff person, lay off. That Friday, a man came in and spoke to our group in treatment. Saturday morning, the man came in, he had a glow about him. He said, Bill, that man spoke last night and said something to me. And he said, I went into my room and I got on my knees and I prayed to God the first time I have ever remembered praying to God in my life. And something happened to me. That man is sober yet. He's living out west someplace in Wyoming. So that would be pretty close to 5 years now. And I saw a spiritual experience occur right in that man. He became the best resident we had. I hated to see him go. The man who was so belligerent and his attitude so hostile become the best resident in the facility. Something works in this place. You're going to find it to be true in the next session. You're going to find it to be true when you leave here. I said to Father Joe one time, I said, gee, Father, a little concerned about, you know, the program and if it's going to take off. And he said, don't worry, the Spirit will be working. And that's what happens. That's what happens at AA meetings. That was natural, but let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? For did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we had been faithful, objectively faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. We found, too, that we had been worshipers. What a state of mental gooseflesh that used to bring on. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves? And then with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower? Who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing, we saw at last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we had been living by faith and little else. Did you catch anything out of there? Worship human beings? You ever see that? What would happen if some famous singer came out and put 4 earrings in her ear? Where did we get that idea? From our heroes. We worship them. Eh? Nothing wrong with it. But if we can worship people, why can't we worship a supreme being? Just think of that. You know, when I went to school, we used to wear white buck shoes and belts. I hated them. Felt like a traffic cop wherever I went. But I wore it. Why? Because everybody else did. When you understand that people have an influence on us, you understand what they mean in AA when they say if you want to stay dry, stay where? Dry places. You can tell a person who uses by the company he chooses. They have an influence on us. Stay with people who are trying to stay sober and your chances increase. Imagine life without faith. Were nothing left but pure reason, it wouldn't be life. But we believed in life, of course we did. We could not prove life in the sense that you can prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling on to the destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seemed more intelligent than that, at least so the chemist said. Hence we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable, though it emanate from our best minds. What about people who proved that man could never fly? Yet we had been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world, people who rose above their problems. They said God made these things possible and we only smiled. We had seen spiritual release but liked to tell ourselves it wasn't true. And I have witnessed that in AA. I have watched people's lives transform by the simple reliance upon a power greater than themselves. And I've seen other people come in. Find the people who don't want to talk about God and spirituality in the program, and you'll see the ones creating the most confusion in the fellowship. They'll start condemning who comes here, why they're here, they shouldn't be here. They have found no inner satisfaction inside themselves. Actually, we're fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship, or of other things, but in some form or another it is there, for faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found a great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. We can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourage you to search diligently within yourself, then if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. In this book, you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration. Business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, even more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. One night, when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I have known are wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. Who are you to say there is no God? This man recounts he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds he was overwhelmed by conviction in the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He had stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time he believed in conscious companionship with his Creator. Thus was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. No later vicissitude has shaken it. His alcoholic problem was taken away. That very night years ago it disappeared. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink has never returned, and at such times a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. What's his sanity? To recognize we're alcoholic and we can't drink. God restores us to sanity. Alcohol is not a problem anymore. Do you know that if you read this at an AA group today, a lot of people would reject it? You're going to be fighting booze for the rest of your life, kid. That's what I was told. And I had another guy came in a rehab unit I ran in Cleveland, and he retired. And he said, could I come in the morning sessions? I said, be glad to have you. He had about 33, 34 years sobriety. And every morning he started off the group, he said this to the fellas in treatment. And this thing called AA is going to be a grind, see? And you're going to be fighting booze the rest of your life, see? And you better keep going to these meetings, because if you don't go to these meetings, you're going to get drunk, see? And he kept going, and I called him and I said, please don't tell these men that the rest of their life they're going to be fighting alcohol. We have a program that delivers them from this. Oh yeah, well you got something new here, huh? You see where we were at? And this man influences a lot of people. Why? He stays sober on just fellowship, and he's constantly fighting alcohol, just like our speaker last night. I had scheduled a speaker, we had to change the schedule to follow him, who has 53 years sobriety, and he came in when he was 21. And yesterday the man said, 21? You couldn't have told me that at 21. Yes, you couldn't tell him, but you told the other guy. It doesn't mean because you can't be told that's right for everyone, because there's an opposite for everything. I am a believer that the sooner an individual gets the education as to what's wrong with him, the quicker he's going to recover. Because he can stay here at the novelty of AA and enjoy the meetings in the fellowship and then get drunk and say, AA doesn't work for me, and never come back, because they never received the treatment for their alcoholism. Listen to what he was saying last night. I surely am glad I did not have to go to 12 years of constant white-knuckle sobriety and the problems he had to find God. You again will hear me say, if your sponsor has never read the big book and never been through the steps, he can't share it with you. You cannot transmit what you don't have. Once you get it, if your sponsor was a person who came into the program and read the big book and went through the steps, that's what you would get when he sponsored you. So who's the sponsor? That's the authority on sponsorship? The first sponsor that went national. The first 100 people who wrote this book. There's where we should be. God had restored his sanity. What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his Maker, then he knew. Even so has God restored us all to our right minds. To this man the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly. But he has come to all who have honestly sought him. See, if you seek, sought means seek. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. All right? Now, one thing I want to clarify, this idea about spiritual experience or spiritual awakening, the first 5,000 books were published. They had spiritual experience was necessary to recover. After the first 5,000 books were printed, they put this addendum in a book on page 569. And on 569, they go into an explanation of spiritual experience. And the reason they did this is because everybody felt if they didn't have the experience that Bill Wilson had, then they couldn't stay sober. So in the second printing, they put this addendum in, and here's what it says on page 569. They try to describe spiritual experience as it really occurs. The terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading shows that personality changes sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. What's the personality change that's going to help us recover from alcoholism? Spiritual experience. That's the personality change. Yet it is true that our first printing gave many readers the impression that these personality changes or religious experiences must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. In the first few chapters, a number of sudden revolutionary changes are described. Though it was not our intention to create such an impression, many alcoholics have nevertheless concluded that in order to recover, they must acquire an immediate and overwhelming God consciousness, followed at once by a vast change in feeling and outlook. Among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, although frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of us experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. Quite often, friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realizes he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unexpected inner resource which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Most of us think this awareness of a power greater than ourselves is the essence of spiritual experience. Our more religious members call it God consciousness. Most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance and belligerent denial. That's exactly what happens to the people who fight the spirituality of this program. When you go to a fellowship and you find the people who are really working and becoming acclimated to their environment and are starting to make changes in their lives, and they're not condemning everybody at the meetings and everything else, you usually find out they have God consciousness within them. The others who resist it, we don't need them druggies here. We don't need this. We don't need that. Oh, my God. You know, I'll give you an example of that. I have to bring this out because I watch it. You know, there's a lot of old-timers that say, we don't want you to talk about drugs at the meeting. You know? Well, when you give a contest to a guy and he's a rebellious nature, you're going to have this occur. And I was at a meeting one day, and I heard one of the speakers saying, there's so-and-so. He doesn't like druggies at the meetings. Watch me lay into him tonight. He started his lead out and he said, I know this is a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and we're not supposed to talk about drugs, but that's my story and I have to tell it. And he was in a dually addicted to alcohol and drugs. So he starts talking about drugs, and I happen to be watching that guy in the back of the room. And by the time the guy's lead was over at comment session, he come out there like a volcano. Raw, we don't need you druggies here. You're not doing anything. You're not doing anything. You're creating controversy in AA, but I'll tell you what will change that. If that guy would sponsor them guys and give them the program of AAs that's laid down in the steps, and just instead of a fellowship program, that man will eventually change and he won't have to worry about it, because once he has God consciousness in him, he won't want to be a rebel. That's what I have witnessed over the years. Not the guys who create issues in here. We have more people talking about the third step of AA. Third step isn't the most important step. If it was, it would have been first. The first step says our recovery depends upon AA unity. And anybody uses a wedge with the traditions to put a wedge in our unity isn't doing us any favors, creating controversy. Got that out, didn't I? We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. There is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is a proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. That ends our session for this morning. We'll be back in here about 25 after 10. Bring your big books with you. Now we're going into chapter 5, how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. There's 2 points you want to bring out here. How it works. What is it? It is the program of recovery, the 12 steps of AA. And those who have thoroughly followed our path, the path of the founders, the 100 who were in the program when the book was published, that's the path. Not Joe's path, Helen's path, Mary's path, or a better path, but the path outlined in his book. You should underline that, our path. And the statement making that comes out now is those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. You'll notice that when we started this project or this program, in the very beginning it said the foundation of complete honesty, a willingness to do anything. People are willing when they're sick to agree to do anything, and then after they're sober or dry for a little while, then they start becoming a little more selective. My sponsor used to say, Bill, any food is good when the belly is lean, but after the wrinkles are taken out, then we become a little more selective. And I believe that's what happens to these people who come into the program and don't want to give themselves entirely to the recovery process. There are such unfortunates, and the founders say that they're unfortunate if the people believe that way. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. Early in childhood, you can see some people who are just honed to nothing more than self-will. And we know that the program that's suggested here is that you get rid of self-will and you start accepting God's will. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Rigorous honesty. That means we have to be honest in all our affairs. Their chances are less than average. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover. They have the capacity to be honest. Because you have a psychological disorder doesn't mean you have to be dishonest. You can have a psychological disorder and become honest, and this program will work. Now, what you have to be careful of in this program are the egomaniacs. These are not the guys that are always talking about themselves, but the egomaniac that you have to fear in this program is the one who quotes the 5th chapter, something like this. Rarely have I seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed my path. You don't need God, big book, steps, and spirituality. Just do what I do and you'll be all right. That's egomania. They're presenting a program that's never been tested, never been written down. Nobody can evaluate it. They just float from year to year in AA saying, my program works better than the AA program. That's an egomaniac. Stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. When are you ready to take steps? After a year's sobriety? When you like what we have, then you're ready to take certain steps. See? What we're doing today, let me give you an example of this. You go to see a doctor and you tell him, Doc, I'm sick. And the doctor looks at you and he said, boy, you really are sick. I'll tell you what you do. You go home and get well for 1 year, and then when you come back, I'll treat you. What would you say to that doctor? I want to get treated now, I'm sick. That's exactly what happens when a person comes to AA with alcoholism and they say, quit drinking for a year, then get into the steps. What do I need them for if I can quit drinking for a year? Take another example. You go to see the doctor, and you tell him your symptoms, and he writes you out a prescription. And after you get that prescription, it's to make you feel better, right? What do you do with the prescription after you get it? Would it make much sense to you to take it home and put it on a shelf and say 1 year later I'll take the prescription to the pharmacy? That's how ridiculous some of the ideas that are coming into the program are. Get well to follow the prescription. I don't need it then. Get well on the prescription. Again, a sponsor cannot transmit what he does not have. If all he has is the fellowship, he may be the most earnest man alive, believing what he's done because he has faith in his sponsor. He can only share what he has, and if he only has the fellowship, that's all you're going to get. At some of these, we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from when? The very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us, but there is one who has all power, that one is God. May you find him when? Now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. With complete abandon. In other words, what we're saying is we're abandoning our own ideas and we're going into the God concept. Right? We deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. Remember the peculiar, strange mental twist that precedes a relapse into drinking? How does that occur? Does your mind say, if I don't have a drink, I'm going to die? It plays games with us. It takes us into euphoric recall. We can always remember what good it does for us. One of the girls said here she has an earache, right? She wants to find something for her earache. When she finds out what takes care of her earache, every time she has it, she's going to use it, right? Every time I have this compulsion, this obsession to drink alcohol, because it's going to do something for me, I better find a substitute for it. How do you get tempted with alcohol? Let me give you an example out of my own case history. This is called disclosure. They tell me in the recovery professional context, you too much disclosure. I said, yeah, you're probably right. You know. But I was sober about 3 years, living home with Mommy. I was divorced, ex-convict, everything happened in my life. And at Easter time, we have a traditional Slovak breakfast. Ham, sausage, salads, baked rolls, and certain ethnic dishes. And my mother would be entertaining the family, and I would bring the dishes out and set them up on the table. And that way she could stay with the family. It was a little way of paying her back for all she put up with me. And every time I opened up the refrigerator the door, I would see the cans of beer in there. Never bothered me in the least. But this beautiful nose you see was worked on a few times. People readjusted it for me. And cartilage floats in here, and sometimes I talk like this when I can't breathe through my nose, and I'm supposed to get that cartilage cut out, but I suck air through my nostrils. And this is occurring shortly after this Easter breakfast, and I'm laying in bed and I'm sucking air through that nostril, trying to get air through there, and immediately my mind went to the refrigerator. And it went something like this: Bill, there is beer in the refrigerator. And the other side said, so what? Go get a can of beer. For what? For your nose. What does a can of beer have to do with your nose? You chug it. Yes. What happens when you chug beer? You create gas and must burp. Yes. Hold your hand over your mouth and burp out your nose. It'll open it up. Who else but an alcoholic would get those kind of... See, my mind never said go to the refrigerator, take a can of beer and go to jail. I have to tell myself that. Go to the refrigerator and get a can of beer and you'll lose your job. It'll never say that to me. it always comes back euphorically. And I have to learn how to laugh that off. Those little temptations will come, you'll be able to work with that. But not when you have an obsession. I got drunk 2 times in here because of the obsession, never treated it the way this program suggests. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. It doesn't say, here are the programs we suggest you take after years of sobriety. Doesn't say that. Doesn't say, here is this program, here are the steps we took after we were sober 5 years. It says, here are the steps we took. That means we took them. We did them, which are suggested as a program of recovery. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. That's step 1, right? What's the next step, 2? Well, how come people say I could take the first part of the first step but not the second part? Anybody that's sitting in this room that's an alcoholic knows there's no 2 parts to the first step. If you don't think you're an alcoholic, you may play around with that. But a real alcoholic sitting down there, you give me a drink and I'm like the fella I read about in the grapevine. Fella asked me one time, he said, how come you don't drink? I said, I wake up in spots. He said, spots? What kind of spots? I said, Denver, LA, Chicago. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. How did we came to believe? By coming to AA meetings? No, by trying to quit drink. That's how you came to believe. Not by attending an AA meeting and seeing if I'm an alcoholic. I came to believe because I tried to quit and found out I couldn't. There was my experience. There's the basis for my recovery. There's the basis for me coming to the conclusion. I tried to quit and I found I couldn't. Or when I take a drink, I have a little control over the amount I drink. 2 questions. That happened in my life. So I tried to stop. My years before AA are laced with periods of abstinence. Me trying to quit, I was suffering the consequences. There is the roots of steps 1 and 2. Conclusions in our own mind. And if you've come to these 2 conclusions, step 3 says, made a decision to turn our will and lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Made a decision. I make a decision to go swimming. I made a decision, say this morning I got up to go swimming. Am I swimming? The decision didn't do anything, did it? If I make a decision to go swimming, what do I have to do? I have to put on my swimming trunks unless I'm going skinny dipping. All right? I have to get in a vehicle and I have to go to some place that they have water and I must dive into the water. Otherwise the decision is to no avail. I could make the decision every day and never go swimming. If I made a decision to turn our will and lives over to the care of God as we understood Him, then I must go to step 4, which is the beginning of the process of how I do this. After I make the decision, the rest of this is to determine how I go about following through with it. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Does it say admitted to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs? What does it say? Read that to me, somebody. That's 1 time, right? Go ahead. To ourselves, that's 2 times. Oh, 3 times I make the admission. How many people going through this program understand that there's a little bit more to a 5th step than just to one individual? I didn't know that till my sponsor came into my life. And people will ridicule you today if you go to the AA program. Why is it in there if it's not supposed to be? Because they found out there's some reason for us to go through this 3 times. Maybe you'll find out before the sessions are over. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and also, when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So the 10th step tells me that what I started in the 4th, I continue doing. See? Continued to take personal inventory. Where did I start it? In the 4th? In other words, maybe I'm not going to do it perfectly the first time, so I have to continue it. And it gives me a second part also. I'm continuing what I started in the 4th. Also, when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. I'm doing something daily. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. How do you have a spiritual awakening? By attending AA 365 days, perfect attendance for 1 year? It tells you in black and white how you have a spiritual awakening. As the result of these steps, we tried to carry these various messages. It says we tried to carry what kind of message? This message of a spiritual awakening. Keep it in context. We tried to carry this message of a spiritual awakening to alcoholics and to practice these principles. What are the principles? The steps in all our affairs. Those are the 12 steps. Now let me take it into a category that maybe some of you will understand a little better. There was a man eating in a restaurant one morning, and he was a businessman. And everybody that saw him said, "Hi, Joe, how are you doing?" "Fine, fine. How's business?" "Great. Really doing great." Now, he said that several times in the morning to people in the restaurant. And while he was sitting in the restaurant, he came to a conclusion. He said, "My business is not successful. I'm going bankrupt. Why am I telling everyone my business is successful?" He's getting honest with himself. And he happened to be reading the newspaper, and he read in the newspaper an advertisement. And it said, "Business consultants available for failing businesses. Seek out our help." And he read that, and he came to the conclusion, well, if my business is failing, maybe I should call in a consultant. And he called up the company. What had he just done? Took step 1 and 2. The business consultant came over to his business office, and he said, "Is your business failing? Do you need help?" And the man said, "Yes." He says, "Are you willing to turn your business over to me to run it for you?" He said, "Yes." What had the man just done? Step 3. And the man who took over the business says, "Now this is my first request of you. I want you to go to your warehouse and take inventory in that warehouse and find everything in there that's been losing money for you." And the man went and took an inventory. He said, "What should I do with it?" He said, "Let me read it. Tell me what's losing you money." What had he just done? Steps 4 and 5. And after that he said, "Now, you told me what's losing your money. Are you willing to have me remove all these bad business practices from your operation?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Then ask me to." What has he done? 6 and 7. And now the business consultant said, "I want you to go out and I want you to become willing to pay back all the people you've cheated in business. Are you willing to do that?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Then go out and pay them all back." He said, "But how?" He said, "Those that you cheated in numbers, if they ordered 50 parts, you only gave them 48, you'll pay them back." What has he just done? 8 and 9. And then he says, "What I want you to do now is continue your inventory every day." What's that? And the same practices. Then I want you to call me up on the telephone every day, tell me how you're doing, and let's see how your business is going. What's that? 11. After you do these first 11 propositions, your business is not only going to be a little more successful, but I am going to make you a consultant, and you are going to go out and help other businesses to readjust. What is that? Can you understand it in business? If a man had a failing business, why would he want to wait a year to find out why he's failing? Now put it in perspective. If my life is not going properly and I'm not happy with the way it is, I want some immediate service. This program will afford that opportunity to you. Now, many of us exclaimed, "What in order? I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. Even I am not. Ask my wife. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. In other words, these things are going to be practiced daily, and we're going to grow in effectiveness and understanding, right? The principles we have set down are guides to progress. The principles are referred to as what? The steps. Are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Now here's what we were referring to last night. Our description of the alcoholic, that was right in the first chapters. The chapter to the agnostic, which we did this morning, and our personal adventures, that means the things that we have done. Before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. In other words, the first 4 chapters have made clear 3 pertinent ideas, 3 points to contemplate. Here's the first one. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. The second point is B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism, and I hear people saying, if it wasn't for my sponsor, I would never be sober today. That is a human power. C, that God could and would if he were sought. Where does my recovery come from? God could and would if he were sought. Now, what did Bill Wilson say about these 3 propositions? I have it here someplace. I'll read you what Bill Wilson said. Well, I don't even have to read it. I can recite it to you. Bill Wilson said this: if you had read the book this far and you do not agree with it, either reread the big book or throw it away. That's what he originally had in there, in his original manuscript. And I should read that show. Here's exactly how it goes. If you are not convinced on these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point or else throw it away. In other words, if you're not convinced and you're a member of AA and you're trying to get sober about what we have just read in here, then he's saying either reread it, get the first 4 chapters down, or throw it away. They made him take that out. That's how much Bill believed in this program. Now, we just read C. What did C say? That God could and would if he were sought? Being convinced, we are at step 3. Being convinced of what? The line right before it, previous to that statement. Always remember, each line takes you into the next line. And whenever you want to compare what's being said, look at what was said before it. If we're convinced that God could and would if he were sought, then we're at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will. What is our will? That's our thinking. And our life, what is our life? Our actions. In other words, what we're saying here is our thinking and our actions we're going to turn over to God now, as we understood him. Here's the 2 questions most people miss. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? If we're going to turn our will and lives over to the care of God as we understood him, it's asking us, what do we mean by this, and what do we do? What's the very next 3 words? The first requirement is. The first requirement of what? of turning our will and life over to the care of God as we understood Him. The first requirement to do that is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. In other words, what we're saying is we're no longer going to determine the course of action. We're going to get a new director in our lives. We're going to become God-oriented. You see that? You see how it leads you from one line to the next? On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. On what basis? A basis of a life convinced that we can run it on self-will. What did Milt say last night? You can't blame anything that happens into your life if God is not in your life, because you are God. You're determining the course of action. Once you get out of the driver's seat and let somebody else in there, then your life seems to be a little more controllable. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show. It's forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be what? Quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest or self-sacrificing. That's the person who becomes a people pleaser. And they say, I'm a people pleaser for what? I have no life of my own. No, they want a result. They're becoming the actor. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest, but as with most humans, he is most likely to have varied traits. What usually happens? The show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still the play does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? Question. Is he not really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim of the delusion he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well? Is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things he wants? And do not his actions make each one of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Is he not even in his best moments a producer of confusion rather than harmony? Our actor is self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. Now let me give you an example of how the person becomes an actor. I'm going with my first wife, I'm courting her. I stop in a bar room, I'm drinking regularly now. In a bar room, 18 years old. And I'm going to see the future wife's parents. The guys say, Bill, how about a beer? Nah, not me. How come? I'm going to visit the future in-laws. Got to make an impression. What am I saying right there to those fellas? I don't want them to smell any booze on me because I know it's not right. Get a box of candy, a bouquet of flowers, and about 4 or 5 Havana cigars. Why? That's the way we used to do it. I never heard of such a thing as the girl taking the man out. I wished I had. So I knock on the door, and she lets me in, and she says, Bill, I want you to meet my parents. And I say to them, oh, I have waited for this occasion. I've looked forward to it. And I give the old man 4 or 5 Havana cigars. And I give the mother a box of candy, and I give the flowers to the future wife. Really setting the stage, right? And we're going out to a restaurant to eat. And I had never been there. I had inquired. I didn't spend money in restaurants. I eat at home. I drink in the bars. But I'm going to impress her. See, I'm making his first impression, right? The actor. And I ask the guys, where's a good restaurant to go? And they tell me what to order on the menu and everything else. And I do exactly like they say. And as we're leaving, I say to the parents, and don't worry, I'll have your daughter home by 11 o'clock. You doggone right she's going to be home at 11 o'clock. Why? I'm going to get a drink after that. And she went to the closet to put her coat on. She opened up the closet door. You ever see that cartoon, The Road Runner? Beep, beep. Boy, I run over there. I grabbed her coat and I held it up for her. She put it on, you know, looking corner of my eye. I see Mommy and Daddy watching. Gentlemen. See? And I went to go out the door and I opened up the door for her. All right? And held it open while she went down, and there was 4 steps to go down. And I grabbed her arm and I said, "Be careful now, dear." And I took her down the 4 steps. 17 years she's been going up and down those steps. But now I'm guiding her, right? And we went over to the car and I opened the door for her. And as she was closing the door, I yelled, "Wait!" And she jumped and said, "What?" I said, "Your coat is hanging out the door." And like Sir Walter Raleigh, I picked this coat up and I closed the door. And I sit in the car and I start off and I stop for every stop sign. And I drive perfectly down the road. And we go to the restaurant and I say, "You'll enjoy the food here. It's really great." Like I've been there time and time. Never been there before. Went in, we sat at the table. I pulled a chair out for her. She sat down at the table. I said, "Order the such and such. It's really great here." She ordered that. And we had pleasant conversation and I never drank. And this poor girl thought she was really winning, right? And then I took her home. I went to the bar room and I drank. And shortly after that, I put the ownership on. And one night we're going out and we're going to a restaurant to eat. And she's standing by the closet. I said, "Aren't you going?" She said, "Yes, my coat." I said, "Yes, it's in the closet." That's usually where we hang it, isn't it? And as we were going out the door, I walked out the door and the door had a spring on it and it just about come and got her. And I'm down the steps now. And I'm sitting in a car and I'm looking at the wristwatch and beep, 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 beep. "Come on, let's go." And I'm driving like a maniac. What happened to that poor relationship? Oh, I think most of us can identify with that. That's what they're talking about. We know exactly what we have to do. We know when our behavior is extraordinary, out of the ordinary. We know what we're supposed to do. And when alcohol comes in there, it says that when alcohol is concerned, we become very selfish and self-centered. Our actor is self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. Self-centered. I'm in need. Do you know how many screenings I've done for people to admission to treatment centers? I say roughly over the years about 7,000 to 8,000. All right? And most generally, everyone you get across the desk from you is eager to get into treatment. What are you willing to do? Anything. I need help. I want to give this up. You probably heard it with some of the people in here. I need help. What are you willing to do? Anything. Just get me help. And as soon as they get in, what happens? I didn't know I was supposed to do this. I know I was supposed to do that. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. It changes. But where were they when they were getting screened? Humble. They know what they have to do. See, we know what we're doing. He is like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining of the sad state of the nation, the minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century, politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave, the outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him, and the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up. Whatever our protestations, are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, and our self-pity? You stay inside of you, that's where you're at. Do you know I happened to have a traffic charge on me and I had to go to prison. And while I was there for 28 months. And in those 28 months, I only met 2 guilty people. We have a very ineffective penal system. My wife came to visit me and I said, "You know," I said, something's wrong with the state of Ohio. She said, why? I said, nobody's guilty. Everybody I met in there was for a bad rappy, somebody finked on them, somebody set them up, prosecutor didn't like them, the PO turned them in or created a case on them. Me and another fellow by the name of Bill were the only two guilty ones. It's exactly what they're talking about. See? Other people, places, and things. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Why? Does selfishness, self-centeredness make me an alcoholic? No. What are we trying to do in the third step? We're making a decision to bring God into our lives, right? What keeps God out? Selfishness, self-centeredness. See? People, if you don't tie that in, you won't know what you're doing. You're making a decision to turn your will and life over to the care of God as we understood Him. The first requirement is we get rid of self-will, and it's telling us selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, because if we don't get rid of self-will, we'll never have room for God. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, all dealing with self, we're dealing with self, no room for God. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation. But we invariably find that at some time in the past, we have made decisions based on self which later place us in a position to be hurt. I'll give you an example of that. I went to a meeting and a man who was sober about 12 years was sitting at the table, and I could see by his eyes that they were puffy and they were red, and he was ready to break out crying. And we'll call him Joe. And I said, Joe, what's wrong? Barely get it out, whimpering. My wife served me with divorce papers today. 12 years sober. Why? I could have told him why, but he was hurting enough. I didn't have to rub salt into the wounds. But when he came into the program, he had children in his family. And the youngest child was about 6 years of age. He had 3 children. The youngest was 6. And he sobered up. He dried out in AA. But he never did any steps, any program, any amends, or nothing. His statement was this: I quit drinking. What the hell else do you want from me? And after he was sober about 4 years, his wife gave me a call. And she said, Bill, she said, can you explain this to me? I said, I'll try. We never had money for a vacation because Joe drank it all up. But Joe's sober now, and we finally got ourselves above water and a chance for a vacation, and he's down to Myrtle Beach with the guys golfing, and I'm home with the children. Do you think that's fair? And I couldn't answer her. I didn't want to start an issue inside the family. Wasn't going to solve anything. But when that youngest child turned 18 and he graduated from high school, she came out and served him the papers and said, we don't need you anymore. You get the message? We practice these principles in all our affairs, not just at an AA meeting, not just in a fellowship. There's a man who didn't understand that. Do you know that man stayed sober and ended up divorced and is not drinking yet today, but he has a divorce and still yet is unacceptable to this program? That's obstinacy. This is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. If I am God, I don't need a God. So I have to quit playing God. That's what I was telling you about guys in treatment on the telephone. Trying to run the family outside of the treatment center. Do it my way. I'm boss. I bring the paycheck home. Shut up. You got no voice. We got to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. If God's going to be our director, what does the director do? He guides you. He directs you. He is the principal. We are His agents. He is the Father, and we are His children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. What's a keystone in an arch?
The stone right at the point. The arch is this way, it's the stone right.
Right in the center that holds the whole arch together. What holds the whole arch together? A simple process. God is our Father, we are His children. Most ideas are simple. That is the keystone of the arch. All right? In other words, we're not running the show, and through that arch we're going to pass into a freedom and happiness. Now it says, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all-powerful, He provided what we needed. He didn't give us what we wanted. He provided what we needed. If we kept close to Him and performed His work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of His presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter we were reborn. What did that paragraph just cover? The promises of the third step. There are more than 12 promises in AA. You have just covered the promises of the third step right there. We were now at step 3. Now, some of you have already taken the third step. Some of you never had. Nobody knows who did which. So if you would, let's join hands and make a circle. Leave your books and recite after me, if you will. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood Him, now you recite after me, God, I offer myself to Thee.
God, I offer myself to Thee.
To build with me.
To build with me.
And to do with me as Thou wilt.
And to do with me as Thy will.
Relieve me of the bondage of self.
Relieve me of the bondage of self.
That I may better do Thy will.
That I may better do Thy will.
Take away my difficulties.
Take away my difficulties.
That victory over them.
That victory over them.
May bear witness to those I would help.
May bear witness to those I would help.
Of Thy power.
Of Thy power.
Thy love.
Thy love.
And Thy way of life.
And Thy way of life.
May I do Thy will always.
May I do Thy will always.
You have just now completed the third step of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's that simple. Look what it says after that. We thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, and we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to Him. In other words, it's telling you that if you're not going to go on with the rest of the program, and you're not going to change your lifestyle, stop. Don't go any farther. Because then you're making a mimicry out of this. If you go through this process and you believe you're going to do it, and you start living the same way without trying to change, then it's not going to work. But if you're sincere and you thought well about taking this step, and after you took this step, if you think well and you want to go on, then this program's going to make sense. At last, abandon ourselves utterly to Him. We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person, such as our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor. Why do you think they have wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor and not another member of AA? Because there was no fellowship around. And this is 1939. There's only 100 sober alcoholics, and the book is going national. So they can't tell you to go to an AA member. because there's no AA members around. So they're telling you to select a person. If this was written today with the fellowship and the numbers of groups, I'd say find another person in the program. That's the way I think they would say it. But it is better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. And I don't think there's anybody in here who would take a step with anybody who would misunderstand why we're doing it. The wording was, of course, quite optional so long as we expressed the idea, voicing it without reservation. This was only a beginning. What was only a beginning? The decision, the prayer, is only a beginning. Though if honestly and humbly made, in effect sometimes a very great one was felt at once. It said the first requirement to turn our will and lives over to the care of God as we understood Him was to get rid of self-will, right? Next, it's telling us what to do next. That's the first requirement. You said the third step prayer. That's the first requirement. Here comes next. This is what we do next. Next, we launch out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless what? At once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Blocking us from what? God. You're trying to find the things in your life that have been blocking you from God. What does it say? Our liquor was but a symptom. It does not say our liquor was a symptom of our disease. It does not say that. That is misinformation presented by the fellowship of AA. It never says liquor is but a symptom of our disease. It says liquor is but a symptom. It does not keep God out of our lives, because there are social drinkers who drink and that doesn't keep God out of their life. You have to keep that in context so you understand what you're doing. Our liquor was but a symptom. Liquor does not keep God out of our lives. So we had to get down to causes and conditions that keep God out of my life. That's what the inventory is all about. I made a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God as we understood Him. I turned my will and life over by saying the third step prayer. Now I'm going to get down to the causes and conditions that will keep God out of my life, because that's what I'm in the process of doing. Bringing a power greater than myself into my life, which will restore me to sanity. Do you understand now where you're at? Now that you made a decision, it tells you at once you should go into an inventory. And we'll go through the process of doing an inventory in here, and you'll get all the groundwork laid out, and those of you who want to become sincere members of AA will go on with this program. It is not difficult. The first thing you have established here is what? There is no time frame to the steps. It is totally dependent on when you make a decision to turn your will and life over to the care of God as we understood Him. The sooner you do that, the sooner you go through the steps. That's what determines the time frame in here. Not how long you're sober. It's when you decide you want God in your life. With that explanation, we'll close this session for now.